So why is movement specifically so important to mental well-being?
I almost don't even know where to begin with this. I mean, you can start with the data. If you just look at the data around the world, every country you can imagine that it has been studied in, every age group, every health status, every gender, every socioeconomic status, people who are more physically active are happier, they have better relationships, they have more meaning in life, they're less at risk for things like depression and loneliness. If you go further than just sort of that kind of epidemiology, and you look at how movement affects the brain and how movement affects mental health, it's as if humans were born to move, and when we are physically active, it puts us in a state of not just body, but of mind to be the best version of ourselves. You know, everything from the neurochemistry of the runner's high, which makes us enjoy cooperating with other people more and gives us hope and optimism, all the way to how, if you are regularly active, you have a different brain and nervous system than people who don't exercise. You have a brain and a nervous system that are more sensitive to pleasure and more resilient to stress. I could literally just talk for the next hour listing the many ways, but I think that the biggest takeaway is that human beings, as individuals and as a species, we thrive when we are active, that our brains aren't just housed in bodies like it's a suitcase that's carrying our brains around. Our brains really work best when we are in bodies that are active.
You actually talk about in the book how it's quite possible that the very reason we developed large brains was to move. Give us some of the science behind that. One thing that I found in my own life was once I could understand the biological mechanisms, once I knew why things were the way that they were, it became easier not to be a slave to it. Then I sort of understood my sense of agency within the meat suit, as it were. So where does the hypothesis that our brains were created to move us come from?
Yeah, this is an idea that I feel like you can't even explain it. This is an idea that if you look at the structure and the function of the brain, everything that humans do other than think is a form of movement. You know, communicating, language, emotion expressions, labor, finding food, celebration, procreation, it's all a physical action. And the idea is basically, other than think and ruminate and plan, that there is no other reason to have a brain except to interact with the world. And even like thinking is subservient to our ability to engage with the world. And so basically we have a brain that scaffolds every type of interaction we have with the world, which is movement. And I think it's not even like a fancy idea, that just is true.
You're onto something insanely powerful that I've never been able to put words to. And I was saying this to somebody not long ago, and I was like, okay, so I grew up in a morbidly obese family. I used to be 60 pounds heavier. And when I got lean for the first time, it was really the first time in my life that I'd been lean, but I'd already been working out for a while. So as I got lean, I was literally hard-bodied. And there is something so psychologically rewarding. This is gonna sound weird, but this is so fucking true. I stand by this. There is something so psychologically rewarding about like reaching across your body and you hit your pec or something, you're like, Jesus, that's hard. Or you slap your abs. I was just doing this morning and my abs are hard. And I was like, it sounds dumb to say it to somebody, but it's fucking awesome. Like there is some weird feedback loop in your brain where I'm like, I don't even know why this is so awesome, but some subconscious part of me, while I didn't think I was a bad person when I was heavier or anything like that, but I was not getting a positive reinforcement loop from encountering my own body. In the way that, and I'm talking like you're not even thinking about something. I'm not talking about looking in the mirror. I'm talking about when you feel, like when you feel a t-shirt tight across your arm when you flex your arm, that there's some signal that gets sent. When you bump yourself and whoa, it's like, that was unexpectedly hard. There is something really powerful in that. And what you're describing is exactly what I get in the gym. I am strong. I remember, so again, I'm not setting any strength records, but my highest deadlift was, I think, 385 pounds. And I thought, I fucking bent over and picked up almost 400 pounds. Like, that's crazy. And when you start thinking about stuff like that and you're putting in that energy and you see that reward and your body is changing, the amount that it changes your mind is crazy.
Well, you know, in my book, I write about that a woman who, she actually had a plan to take her own life. And she went to the gym and she deadlifted a personal best. And it was literally in the moment of sensing her own strength that she decided she wanted to live. And I think that so often movement can give us these moments of feeling what is possible in yourself and for yourself through this very concrete way. You know, one of the ways that I've experienced that, I've had a lifelong fear of flying. I hate flying, and for years I refused to fly. And when I decided that I finally wanted to face that fear, I knew I had to learn how to deal with how I feel on a plane, like my heart pounding, and I feel like I can't breathe, and I feel like I'm trapped. And I thought, like, because I couldn't practice by getting on a plane, that's too much. But when else have I ever felt that way? And I realized the one time I'd been to an indoor cycling class, I hated it. I felt like I was trapped. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding. I wanted to escape, but I felt like the instructor had locked the doors and there was no way to get out of the room. So I started going to indoor cycling classes as a way to practice getting used to what it feels like to be on a plane, to feel trapped and afraid. And what was so crazy about it to me is, first of all, it worked, right? I learned how to tolerate that discomfort. I learned I can have a voice in my head that says, you can't handle this, you need to escape. And at the very same time that voice was in my head, I could have the experience of choosing to stay. Be like, no, you decided to do this, and so there's room for this voice in your head and also staying. And I learned to tolerate the sensations of discomfort. But something weird happened where, because of the playlist and like listening to empowering music, that I started to sense the sensations differently. And I started to have an experience when my heart was pounding of feeling not afraid, of like feeling brave and feeling badass. And somehow my brain like reorganized how it experienced the physical sensations of fear, so that in moments when I actually was afraid, suddenly I was like, I guess I'm brave, I guess I'm a badass. And movement is so amazing in that, how it gives us access to physical feedback that allows us to have this different sense of self. And again, I'm always encouraging people to figure out what's that movement for you, because this isn't about, believing everyone should exercise in a certain way to achieve some sort of ideal health, and certainly not some sort of like ideal appearance, but that every form of movement has its own empowering effects on your mind, and often it's a matching process to figure out what that is.
So talk to me. I don't experience the runner's high.
Okay.
So I work out every day because I recognize its importance, but I think I recognize it largely intellectually, especially because I've been doing it now for so many years, so I don't take a lot of time off from it, so I don't have sort of really a lot to compare to. My wife, though, gets a pretty powerful runner's high. If she's stressed out, she needs to work out, whereas if I'm stressed out, I'd actually rather take time off, and I find that gives me time to sort of settle my mind, settle my nervous system. So what is it that's going on physiologically that makes, like, the connections between anxiety, depression, working out, cognitive optimization, the book that John Rady wrote, Spark, going into like, if you have like your hardest class, you should do physical education right before it and get your heart rate up. What is going on physiologically that makes that true?
Oh my gosh, okay, so much. But first I want to ask you, you said you don't get a runner's high. What do you actually do? What's your favorite form of exercise?
Well, I have run, so I did cross country for 4 years. So when I say, like, I gave it a shot. I
don't run, so I'm not here to make anyone run.
Well,
I don't get a runner's high either, unless there's a killer soundtrack. But even then, like, why not just dance?
That is super interesting, and I'm very surprised. We will definitely want to get an answer to that. So the exercise that I do is largely just weight-based. So I do some body weight stuff, but primarily I'm trying to lift heavy-ish weights. I'm not like the strongest cat ever, but that's my zone.
So it's interesting. So if you want to look for a classic runner's high, the type of movement that is most likely to trigger it is when you are persisting at something that is like a cardiorespiratory activity, like walking fast, hiking, running, swimming, cycling, dancing. And my guess is that, so we know that there are individual differences in whether people experience that as euphoria versus that might be like, you know, the classic runner's high versus more just a sense of empowerment, something that feels more like a relief. So a lot of it's an individual difference, and a lot of times I think we're promised the euphoria that's like an amazing drug rush. A lot of people don't get that version of the runner's high. But most people, like I don't actually know that there's any evidence that people don't get any version of the runner's high. We know that human beings and also other social species like dogs, when they engage in cardiovascular activity for about 20 minutes or so, moderate intensity, one of the changes that you see in the brain is an increase in endocannabinoids, which is the neurotransmitter that cannabis mimics. And if you work really hard, you can get also an endorphin rush. Or if you have a killer playlist, you can get an endorphin rush. Or if you're moving with people that you love, you can get an extra endorphin rush. But the core high actually isn't endorphins, it's endocannabinoids. So some people experience that as a kind of euphoria, but a lot of people experience it as just feeling better. Like the worries are a little bit less, everything feels possible, things feel like there's reason to hope. Endocannabinoids also increase the pleasure we get from social contact. So sometimes you don't even notice what the runner's high is or the exercise high is until afterwards, and then you reunite with your partner or you meet up with your team. And suddenly it's an easier interaction. Somehow their stories are funnier and it feels better to hug someone. So the runner's high, it's not always that rush that people think it is, where like in the moment, peak intensity, you're like loving life because you're working hard. The actual runner's high is more of this neurochemical change that seems to make us more optimistic and also more open to connecting with others. And my guess is you might get a version of that, but also the movement, the exercise that you're doing is probably going to affect your brain and your mental health in slightly different ways. So we know, for example, when you are lifting heavy weights, or you're doing things that really engage the core, the muscles of your core actually talk to your brain in a way that tends to rather produce this kind of happiness or euphoria that actually calms down anxiety. It's a really interesting neurofeedback loop that when you brace your core and when you're engaging in that kind of strong muscular contraction that's stabilizing, your brain reads those signals from your body as essentially, I've got this. I'm in control. So that's not really like a runner's high, but it can be a really empowering state of mind. And so your literal moment-to-moment sense of self is always being informed by what your body is doing. And we know that when people are active, often they experience themselves as a different version of themselves. So with something like weightlifting, you are literally getting feedback, sensory feedback from your body that says, I am strong, I move heavy things, I do hard things, I'm powerful. And your brain does not receive that information from so you're lifting something heavy, so your brain is gonna get feedback from muscle contraction and tension of the tendons on your joints. Your brain does not get that information and think, my bicep is strong, or my lats are strong. The brain thinks, I am strong, I have strength, I am exerting myself in this way. And every movement form has its own signature proprioceptive feedback. So my favorite form of exercise, my favorite forms are dance and yoga. And when you think about the gestures in dance or the gestures in yoga, the full body gestures, my favorite proprioceptive feedback are actually these physical signatures of joy, like your arms stretched out and your gaze lifted and your heart open. And I can start a movement experience feeling depressed and anxious and demoralized, but after 10 minutes of throwing my arms in the air and looking up and smiling, my body is like, you are joy. My brain is like, you are joy. And so often people get attracted to the forms of movement that give them a sense of self that is really personally meaningful or empowering. And with running, sometimes it's I'm free, I'm fast, I'm going somewhere.
Compassion, self-compassion. You teach people how to do that.
Yeah.
How did that become a thing? How do you teach somebody to be more compassionate? And then what's easier, teaching someone to be compassionate or self-compassionate?
Oh, okay, such good questions. So let's define compassion.
Yeah.
So this is my area of research for the past decade or so. And the kind of like the scientific working definition of compassion is that it is a response to suffering. So you become aware of some pain or suffering, and there's a part of you that is moved by that, sometimes like upset about it, distressed by it, touched by it. And there's another part of you that thinks, I can do something to relieve the suffering. I want to do something to relieve the suffering. And so you respond in some way, whether it's through listening or taking action or standing up for someone. So it's this cycle of responding to suffering. And often, like ideally, it includes a sense of hope and empowerment, a sense of maybe love. There's also a kind of a warm glow to it. So it's not a response to suffering that's fueled primarily by anger. It's not a response to suffering that's fueled primarily by empathic distress, like, oh my gosh, you're sad. Like, I can't handle that. I don't like sadness. Let me cheer you up so I don't have to have this sadness infection. That's not compassion, right? It's a response to suffering that's driven by an actual desire to see that suffering relieved, and taking some kind of joy or meaning in that act of trying, of responding. So the way that you teach people compassion is, first of all, to recognize this is a basic human instinct. And even people who get diagnosed as being sociopaths often have compassion. It's just a narrow circle, right? So pretty much all human beings have the capacity. It's what caregiving is rooted in, so a caregiver and their child or their pet, right? There's this instinctive response. You see them suffering and you want to scoop them up and protect them and take care of them. So this is a basic human instinct. And teaching compassion is often about figuring out where in the process you're shutting down or being less effective. So for some people, the teaching of compassion is about the awareness aspect. Like maybe you are aware when your partner or your child is suffering, but there's a kind of a compassion blindness. Like you don't really see the suffering in the people you work with because you're so focused on yourself, or it's hard to understand the life experiences of people who are different from you, so you don't really see their suffering. So for a lot of people, the teaching of compassion is this kind of cognitive empathy. Like you actually have to learn to pay attention and to imagine what it's like to be other people and to ask people about their experiences. So that can be one aspect of what it means to teach compassion. It's like literally wake up and learn to see more clearly. For other people, they're like overwhelmed by the suffering. They see it all, they feel it all, and where they fall down is being overwhelmed by that. I see all the suffering in the world, and then I just feel powerless or overwhelmed, or I feel like that suffering is so contagious that now I just need to escape it. And so the strength that needs to be developed is that actually the strength that we were talking about earlier, to tolerate that initial distress so that you can choose action rather than being overwhelmed by it. For other people, it's about training the resources. Like you want to be compassionate, but no one ever really demonstrated to you what it's like to listen to someone. And so you actually train in listening, or maybe you need actual skill.
Well, I really want to get to the self-compassion. I think
Yes,
that's something that a lot of people
Yes.
in my audience struggle with, is
Yes.
how to, feel, how to maybe forgiveness. I'm not sure. In fact, that's part of what I'm super curious to know. Like when you say to be self-compassionate, what do you mean? What do you get people to focus on? Is it dropping their eyes and ears down into their own heart, or is it something completely different?
So you asked which was harder, first of all. Self-compassion is definitely harder for most people, and it is harder to teach because it's harder for most people. And I think about this from an evolutionary point of view. Compassion as an instinct is connected to the caregiving system. It exists to help us respond to suffering that is outside of ourselves. Compassion does not function sort of ideally and naturally when we have to be the object of it and the source of it. That is not what compassion exists for. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have compassion for yourself, but I think of all emotions and these capacities we have, they are there for a purpose, and compassion is for responding to the suffering of others. And we have other very powerful instincts that compete with compassion when the suffering is our own. Shame is one. Sadness is one, depression, anger, worry and anxiety. And these are, strong, evolutionarily adaptive emotions that motivate us to actually seek perhaps the help of others, or sometimes to withdraw and try to figure things out. But they themselves often produce a lot of suffering and can keep us from being really effective. The first step is deciding that you are worthy of compassion, that you deserve compassion.
How do you get people to do that?
Well, I often do it sideways. So there's a step in our compassion training called Common Humanity, which is about recognizing what all human beings have in common, which is the desire to be happy, the desire to be loved, the desire to contribute, and the constant experience that falls short from that we all know physical pain, we all know disappointment, we all know rejection, we all know anger, we all know fear. And usually, if people have, through their own experiences, maybe a difficult childhood, a traumatic relationship, that they've come to the conclusion that they can't trust others or that they aren't worthy of compassion, often the first intuition is you have to go in and fix that at like the you level. Let me tell you why you are worthy. Let me create a story about you. But actually, the thing that breaks it open for most people, you already know that you're human. And when you come to recognize that all humans suffer and all humans are trying to be happy, and everything that people do is an expression of that, even if it's not skillful, that often breaks the heart open in a way that's more powerful than like some sort of therapy conversation about why you specifically are deserving.
So I thought, okay, I'm willing to accept that I'm an average human, maybe even a little below average. I actually don't believe that about myself, but I'm saying even if you were a little bit below average, you still fall somewhere in that bell curve. The amount that you can change is extraordinary, far better to focus on that. So I always tell people there's only one belief that matters, and that belief is that you're roughly an average human and that the average human is designed to grow and change. And so now just invest everything into that. That's really interesting. I've never heard anybody else say that like you just need to anchor yourself to being average. Like all humans do this, all humans have that same wants and desires, and why not have compassion for yourself?
Yeah. No, I remember that was one of the very first insights I had as a psychology undergraduate. I remember one day just thinking, wow, like if you don't need to be better than other people, it's just so much easier.
Are you really not trying to be better?
Than other people?
I secretly am.
Are
Not
you?
secretly, it's my obsession, yeah.
Really?
But not in like you said earlier, oh God, I don't remember the exact words you used. It's not like virtue. So you said it's not, when I talk values, I'm not talking about virtue. Like I don't think that it makes me better like that. I'm just trying to outplay. So to me, the name of the game is how much of your potential can you turn into usable skills?
Yeah.
And so that to me is a fun game that I play with compassion. I care deeply about the other players. I am not a step on somebody's neck to get ahead kind of guy. That's not interesting to me. I'd like to see other people win, but I also want to win.
Well, so there are these two human drives, cooperation and competition. Yes. And I think people, they fall on a spectrum of which one is more motivating. I think probably the healthiest is to have both of them being motivating forces, neither one tripping you up too much, because you can definitely fall too much in the, give it all away, the sort of cooperation scale. But this is, I have an identical twin sister, as you mentioned, and this is like the one big distinction between the two of us. She's super competitive, and I just am not. The thing that drives me is, did you do something today that was of value to the world? Like, were you of any use or not? And I can be very hard on myself about that if I feel like I'm not. So it's not like there's no self-criticism. I'm not comparing myself to other people or like a hierarchy, but it's very internally.
I want to get back to that initial insight that you had. So for you, it was a big moment to realize I don't need to be better than other people.
Because growing up, I was always told, be the best, be number one. It's really important to be better than ever. I mean, this is from parents who wanted me to make sure that I was successful, to growing up in a town that that prided itself on being number one in a lot of things. And I don't know, I thought that was the way to be a good human. And at some point I realized it was such a barrier to connecting with other people. And that, you know, I think I remember in one class, it's such a silly little story, but I remember the professor was like, "You've done so well on your exams. We want to give you the chance to not take the final exam. We know you're going to get an A on it, we're pretty sure. So you don't have to take the exam, but we want you to tutor somebody who might not pass this class. And so whatever amount of time you would spend studying for the exam, we want you to tutor her so that she can pass the class." And I was like, this is the most brilliant thing I've ever heard. And at some, like that, it was so much fun. And they were right, I would have gotten an A, but I got to put that time into actually helping someone else who was struggling. And I feel like that was a turning point where I started to think like, how can that be my orientation? Where instead of, if there's a way to invest time where it's about me performing well versus contributing, like how do I redirect the energy so that it's not about my performance as much as it's about my contribution?
So what is ultimately the impact that you want to have on the world?
What I hope every day when I wake up is that something I do, whether it's a dance class that I'm teaching, or it's a book that I wrote 10 years ago, or maybe it's somebody listening to this, I hope that, I think about this every day, there's somebody who right now is facing something in their lives that they aren't sure they can handle. And something I did or said or wrote gives that person a sense that A, they are not alone, and B, that they are adequate to their own life in this moment, even if it's nothing they would have chosen for themselves.